Hello everyone, I hope you enjoy this compilation. An hour and a half of pure terror. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell. I was 13 and living in a small duplex with my dad and older brother. I shared a room with my dad, while my brother had his own space on the other side of the house. That night, my dad had probably gone out to a bar, and my brother was somewhere else, likely out with friends. I was alone, playing the original Resident Evil on PlayStation. By around midnight, my eyes were heavy, and I decided to call it a night. I left my bedroom door wide open, as I often did, letting the sounds of the house drift in and out with the night air. Years of living there had taught me one thing. My dad and brother never came home through the back sliding glass door. Not once. So when I heard it slide open, slow and loud, I froze instantly. The sound echoed through the empty duplex, followed by the unmistakable creak of floorboards. My imagination started racing. My heart thumped hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. I lay flat in bed, straining to listen. Footsteps moved from the dining room, through the kitchen, and into the living room. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. They were methodical but deliberate, taking up the space of the house with their presence. I could hear the soft tap of shoes, the scraping of something being nudged along the floor. A pause. Then the footsteps resumed. Heavier this time. The figure walked past my bedroom doorway. I could feel the air shift as they passed. Then the bathroom light flicked on, spilling brightness across my bed. I lay frozen, exposed, and completely visible to this intruder. My hands were clenched into fists, my breath shallow, my mind racing with impossible scenarios. I could hear him moving around the bathroom, perhaps washing his hands or rummaging through drawers, I wasn't sure, but each sound made my heart race faster. After a few minutes, he moved on to my brother's room. The sounds of drawers opening, objects clattering, even a soft curse, told me he was searching for something. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was certain that if I made a sound, he would come into my room and confront me. I pictured him standing at my bedside, looming over me, though the door remained closed in reality. He circled the living room, pacing back and forth, then returned to my brother's room. I could hear him muttering under his breath, footsteps moving in a rhythm that was almost deliberate, almost taunting. The intruder seemed to know I was there. He moved as if aware of my presence, yet he didn't act aggressively toward me. It was disorienting. The sense of violation was worse than fear alone. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every creak of the floor, every soft shuffle made my skin crawl. I could hear him go back through the house, back toward the back sliding door. The door slid open slowly and with effort, then closed again behind him. Silence filled the house. I lay there, exhausted, trembling, trying to convince myself that it was over. In the morning, my dad and brother returned home, none the wiser. I asked them countless times what had happened that night. They insisted it wasn't them, and I knew it wasn't. The thought of someone being in my house, walking past me multiple times and never actually harming me or even entering my room was something I've never fully understood. Even now, decades later, I replay that night in my mind. The way the intruder moved, the way he seemed to acknowledge my presence without attacking me, it's a memory that continues to unsettle me. I never knew why he came, why he left, or why he never touched my room. But I know one thing. That night, the house was no longer mine. In 2014, I moved from Canada to Essex, England. I wanted to gain work experience, travel, and honestly find myself. I ended up living in a 3-story flat with 3 older women, Megan, Cherry, and Cassie. Each had her quirks, but Cherry was unpredictable, often bringing strange men home. One evening, I was alone in my bedroom, in my nightie, headphones on, working with papers spread across the bed. Cherry was out, probably at a work dinner that would end in a tantrum later, so I was safe. Or so I thought. I looked up and froze. A man was standing over me. My first thought, maybe one of Cherry's friends, but the reality hit instantly. This man wasn't leaving. He had a bottle of Prosecco in one hand, a knife in the other. His eyes were completely black from dilated pupils, hair wild, shirt light blue, one color popped, Manchester accent. He said, "I'm not here for Cherry." And I realized this wasn't a joke, this wasn't a mistake. He blocked the only path to my bedroom door. I couldn't run. I had to think fast. My heart was hammering, sweat ran down my back. I decided to play along. I said, "Oops, let's clean that up. I prefer drinking from a proper glass." He nodded, and we started moving through the flat together. Each step was calculated. The knife grazed my back lightly at one point. My brain was in overdrive. I talked nonsense to distract him, tried to keep my voice calm and conversational. I said, "Do you want a glass? This is my favorite." Each word was a calculated lie to stay alive. We moved through 3 floors. I pointed out cabinets with wine glasses, talked about the decor, anything to keep him occupied. I was shaking uncontrollably inside, but outside, I acted calm. My survival depended on it. Finally, we reached the kitchen. The table was between us. I waited for the right moment. I ran. My hands fumbled over the locks on the front door. I saw 2 men walking across the street. I shouted. The intruder shoved me aside and ran. One man chased him. The other told me to go inside and call the police. Moments later, he returned, banging on the door, screaming about his glasses. I froze again, heart pounding, as sirens approached. The intruder finally fled, and police arrived shortly after. I learned later that he had been stalking me for months, creating a nest on a hill overlooking our flat. That night, every step, every word, every gesture mattered. I survived because I convinced him it was his idea to move me. The tension, the fear, the adrenaline, everything felt endless. It was a night that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I was 9, home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to be at our aunt's house for lunch, but we were delayed, dawdling over showers and brushing our teeth. Around 10:30 a.m., we heard knocking on the front door. Usually, it was salesmen or religious visitors. We ignored it. Minutes later, I noticed a shadow moving past our bathroom window, a small square of frosted glass, blurred but enough to see movement. My brother and I froze. A hand pressed against the glass, then disappeared. Fear overtook me. My brother called the police immediately. Then came the banging. Loud, brutal. Someone was trying to force the door open. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door. I did, but 5 bangs later, it began to give way. I pressed myself against the wall, knees to chest, imagining what would happen if it broke entirely. Through the phone, my brother whispered our address, barely audible. He said, "There's someone in the house. We're in the bathroom. Please hurry." We could hear him moving around, searching, breaking objects, opening drawers, overturning cupboards. He even found my cell phone, left on the kitchen counter, and threw it aside. I remembered the sound of it hitting the floor, the sharp ping, and the panic that followed. He tried the bathroom door again. My brother grabbed a metal rod to reinforce it. I felt my chest tighten, my palms sweat, my body shaking uncontrollably. Every creak, every thud, every crash was magnified in my ears. Finally, after what felt like hours, the intruder left. We waited, silent, listening. When we finally emerged, the house was a mess. Papers scattered, cabinets open, cups broken. Nothing valuable was taken. Even at that age, the sense of violation was overwhelming. The house no longer felt safe. Every sound echoed in my mind for days afterwards. The police arrived only hours later, and the man was never caught. But the memory of that morning, the terror, the helplessness, stayed with me far longer than any physical damage ever could.
I grew up in a very small town in the foothills of the Appalachians. This was the early 1990s, before cell phones, before internet reached most of our homes. Life there felt slower, isolated. Everyone knew one another, and most people were either farmers, miners, or working odd jobs to scrape by. I lived with my grandmother. She was old-fashioned, and she had this way of mixing religion with folklore. So I grew up hearing a lot of warnings. She used to tell me, never whistle after dark, don't answer if you hear your name called outside at night, and if the woods go quiet, you come straight home. At the time, I thought these were just her quirks, maybe things she had learned from her own parents or grandparents, back when superstition was how people explained the unknown. I didn't take them seriously. The memory I'm about to share happened when I was around 10 years old, and it stuck with me my whole life. It was late summer, August maybe, when the days were long and heavy, and the air seemed to press down on you. That evening, the sky had been gray for hours, the kind of sky that makes the whole town restless because you know a storm is coming. By sundown, the wind had picked up, rattling the loose metal on barns, carrying the smell of rain and soil. I was sitting in the living room, half dozing on the couch, when the storm finally rolled in. You could hear it long before it reached us, low thunder echoing across the hills, growing closer each time. The house we lived in was old, with a tin roof, and when the rain started, it hammered so loud we had to raise our voices just to talk. My grandmother stayed in the kitchen, cooking. She never liked storms. She'd mutter little prayers under her breath, sometimes crossing herself without realizing. I, on the other hand, was curious. At that age, storms fascinated me. I remember pressing my bare feet onto the cool wooden floor and walking to the front door. The screen door was thin, rattling in the wind, and beyond it I could see the yard already shiny with water pooling. For some reason, I decided to step outside onto the porch. The air felt electric, that sharp metallic smell like iron filling my nose. My skin prickled with goosebumps, even though it was still hot and humid. At first, everything felt normal for a storm. The rain was pounding, the lightning flashing far away. But then I noticed something odd. The woods had gone quiet. I don't just mean quieter than usual. I mean silent. No crickets, no frogs, no night birds. Even the wind seemed to hold back, as if the whole mountain had paused. It was such an unnatural silence that I remember feeling it in my stomach, like when you know you're being watched. I gripped the porch railing and squinted into the trees, waiting for the next lightning strike. When it came, the yard lit up in a flash of white so bright I could see every branch and blade of grass. And that's when I saw it. There was something clinging to the trunk of the oak tree closest to the house. It was high up, maybe 20 feet off the ground, pressed against the bark like some animal trying to hide. But it wasn't an animal. Not one I'd ever seen. Its limbs were too long, too thin, stretched at odd angles. The joints bent wrong, almost backwards, and the way it held itself was unnatural. Its face, or what I thought was a face, seemed faintly luminous, as if it reflected the lightning in a way the bark didn't. The thunder followed a second later, and darkness swallowed it again. My body locked up. I wanted to run inside, but something in me needed to know if it was really there. Another lightning flash came, closer this time, and it was no longer in the tree. It was on the ground, closer to the porch. I swear my breath caught so hard it hurt. My heart pounded in my chest, and all I could hear was blood rushing in my ears. The figure's shape was clear for a moment in the light. Tall, wrong, with a head that tilted too far to the side, and then darkness again. I bolted. My legs finally listened, and I sprinted back inside, slamming the door and locking it. I yanked the curtain closed, my hands shaking so badly I almost tore the fabric. My grandmother rushed in, asking what was wrong. I tried to explain, but the words came broken, choked. I just kept saying there was something out there by the tree. She didn't scold me. She didn't tell me it was just my imagination. She just put her hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "That's why you never go outside when the woods go quiet." Then she closed the door firmly, muttered another prayer, and told me to sit close to her until the storm passed. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake listening to the rain on the roof, half expecting to hear footsteps on the porch or the creak of the door. Every time lightning flashed through the curtains, I squeezed my eyes shut, too afraid to see what might be outside. By morning, the storm was gone. The yard was muddy, branches scattered everywhere. The oak tree looked the same as it always had. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I could have convinced myself it was just a dream. But it wasn't. Even now, decades later, I can picture it perfectly. The way its body clung to the tree, the way it stood on the ground closer than it had any right to be, and the way the silence pressed in, like the world itself was holding its breath. Since that night, I have never ignored my grandmother's rules, because I know now those weren't just superstitions. They were warnings passed down for a reason, and I will never forget what I saw.
This happened back in the summer of 2014, when I was in my early 20s. I had just moved back to Kentucky after dropping out of college, trying to save money and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. That summer, a couple of friends and I had a habit of going for late-night drives. Small towns don't have much going on, and the mountain roads felt like the only place you could breathe sometimes. We'd roll the windows down, blast music, and just drive into the dark until the gas gauge told us to turn back. One night, around midnight, my buddy Ethan suggested we stop and take a quick hike up one of the smaller trails off the road. It wasn't part of the state park or anything, just a narrow dirt path locals used for hunting and fishing. I'd never been on it, but Ethan swore it led to an old overlook where you could see half the valley. I didn't love the idea. I was tired and I didn't have a flashlight, just my phone with maybe 30% battery left. But he was insistent, and our other friend Kyle laughed at me for hesitating. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The air that night was thick with humidity. You could smell the wet earth rising off the ground, the sharp scent of pine mixed with something sour and stagnant, like a creek that had been sitting too long. Fireflies flickered along the tree line, and the sound of cicadas buzzed so loud it almost hurt. The three of us stepped onto the trail, the gravel crunching under our boots before it gave way to packed soil. The moon was out, but the canopy of trees swallowed most of its light. Our phone screens became the only glow, casting a sickly blue tint on our hands and faces. At first it was fine. We joked, shoved each other around, Ethan leading the way like he knew exactly where we were going. But within 10 minutes, I started feeling uneasy. The forest felt wrong. It wasn't one single thing, more like a collection of details my brain couldn't piece together. The air was too still, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Every now and then I thought I heard a second set of footsteps, not in rhythm with ours, but whenever I'd stop to listen, there was nothing. I told myself it was just nerves. Then Kyle mentioned it out loud. "You guys hear that?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Ethan laughed, said he was paranoid, but I'd heard it too. The sound of something walking, slow and deliberate, just far enough back that we couldn't see it. We picked up the pace, and that's when the noises changed. Instead of footsteps, it was whistling. A long, steady whistle that rose and fell like a tune someone might hum absent-mindedly, except it echoed strangely through the trees, bouncing in directions that didn't make sense. Sometimes it sounded close, other times distant, but never like it was moving away. Kyle cursed under his breath. I told Ethan we should turn back, but he kept shaking his head, saying we were almost there. The whistle stopped. For a moment, relief washed over me. But then came the voice. It was low, guttural, and it didn't sound like English or any language I knew. Just a string of syllables, drawn out, whispered, in a rhythm that felt too deliberate to be random. We froze in place, all three of us staring into the blackness behind us. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were locked. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Finally, Ethan muttered, "It's probably just some drunk messing with us." But his voice was shaking. We forced ourselves to keep walking, faster now, practically jogging. The dirt path was uneven, roots snagging at our shoes, but the need to get out was stronger than the fear of tripping. That's when the smell hit us. Rot, like roadkill left in the sun, heavy, wet, clinging to the back of your throat. Kyle gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose. I did the same. The voice came again, closer. I swear it was right behind us, maybe 20 feet back. We spun around, shining our phone flashlights into the trees. The beams cut through leaves and trunks, but nothing was there. And then the woods erupted. Not with the voice, not with the whistle, just movement. Branches snapping, brush shaking, the sound of something large charging through the undergrowth towards us. We didn't think, we just ran. Our shoes pounded the dirt, lungs heaving, branches clawing at our arms and faces. I kept my phone out in front of me, its dim glow bouncing wildly, barely showing where the path led. Behind us, the crashing sound didn't fade. It followed, keeping pace. Ethan tripped, sprawling under the ground. Kyle and I grabbed him by the arms and yanked him back up, adrenaline making us stronger than we had any right to be. We didn't stop until we saw the faint glimmer of headlights through the trees. The trail spit us out onto the road, and we bolted straight to the car. We piled inside, slammed the doors, and locked them. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. When the engine roared to life, we all sat there staring at the trail entrance. Nothing came out. The forest was still, but the smell lingered, faint even inside the car. We drove back in silence. Nobody wanted to admit how scared we'd been, but none of us slept that night. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, maybe a coyote, but bears don't whistle. Coyotes don't speak.
And the worst part? When I mentioned it to a neighbor who had lived in the area for decades, he didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just shook his head and said, "That's why you don't go out there after dark. Some things in those woods aren't meant to be followed." I never argued with him, because no matter what explanation I try to give myself, I know deep down, something followed us that night. Something that wanted us to hear it. And the truth is, if we had stopped, if we had turned around for even one more second, I don't think we would have made it back to the road at all.
This happened just a couple of years ago in southern West Virginia, where I grew up. I was in my mid-20s at the time. By then, I had lived in the mountains my whole life and thought I understood the woods pretty well. I'd hiked most of the local trails, hunted, fished, camped. Nothing had ever happened to me that felt truly unusual. Until this night. It was late summer, one of those nights when the air is still heavy even after the sun goes down. A friend of mine, Jason, had come over. We'd had a few beers on my porch, talking about work and life and whatever else. Nothing serious. We were restless, though, and when he suggested taking a walk, it seemed like a harmless idea. There's a trail not far from my place, maybe a mile long, that loops through the woods and back toward the road. It wasn't remote, not the kind of trail you'd expect to feel unsafe on. I'd walked it countless times, even after dark. We grabbed a flashlight, an old plastic one that I knew didn't have the best batteries, and headed out. The night air was thick, almost wet. The smell of honeysuckle still clung to the edges of the woods, mixed with the damp scent of leaves and dirt. Our boots crunched on the gravel at the trailhead before giving way to the softer, packed dirt once we stepped under the canopy. The trees swallowed us quickly. I remember how different the world felt once we were in there, with only the thin circle of light from that flashlight to guide us. Beyond that circle, everything was just black. The kind of darkness you can't get in town. The kind that presses against you, reminding you how small you really are. At first, we joked around. Jason made some dumb comment about coyotes. I teased him about being scared of the dark. We weren't really paying attention, just walking, laughing, letting the beer buzz carry us along. But maybe 10 minutes in, I noticed something. The forest had gone quiet. When I say quiet, I don't mean just less noisy. I mean silent. A silence so complete it was almost physical, like cotton stuffed in your ears. The crickets stopped. The frogs were gone. Even the wind seemed to pause. I slowed down, shining the flashlight around. The beam caught nothing but tree trunks and branches, but my chest tightened anyway. Jason noticed my change in pace. "What's up?" he asked. "Do you hear that?" I said. He frowned. "Hear what?" "That's just it," I told him. Nothing. We stood there for a moment, side by side, listening. The silence rang in my ears. It was wrong. And then, a voice. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods, off the trail. Faint, but distinct enough to know it wasn't an animal. It was stretched out, hollow, as if someone was calling from far away, or through something that distorted the sound. I froze. Jason swung the flashlight in the direction of the sound, the beam shaking in his hands, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" he called. My stomach dropped. "Don't!" I hissed. He glanced at me, surprised at how sharp I sounded. But before either of us could say anything else, the voice came again. Closer. Not loud, not shouting, just closer, like it had cut the distance between calls. The words were hard to make out. It might have been saying our names, or maybe it was just a trick of the echo, but it didn't sound right.
We started walking again, faster this time, back toward the trailhead. The flashlight beam jittered across the dirt path, bouncing with Jason's uneven steps. My heart hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. That's when the footsteps started. Behind us. They weren't trying to hide. Heavy, deliberate crunches of leaves and twigs. Every time we stopped, they stopped. When we moved, they moved. Jason's face went pale. "There's someone back there," he whispered. I shook my head. No one should be out here, not at this hour. We kept walking, picking up the pace. My mouth was dry, and every muscle in my body screamed to just run, but some instinct told me not to. Like if we ran, it would chase. Then it screamed. The sound split the night in half. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was both, and neither. A deep, tearing howl, metallic at the edges, that rattled my ribs and made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It didn't sound like something living. It sounded like something breaking. Jason dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the ground, lighting the trees at strange angles. We both bolted, instincts finally taking over. Our feet pounded the dirt, slipping on roots, catching on rocks. The whole time, I swore I heard it behind us. The crunch of steps, the rush of something moving fast, like it was right on our heels. When we burst out of the woods onto the road, I nearly collapsed. My lungs burned, my throat raw from sucking in the humid air. Jason bent double, hands on his knees, trying to steady himself. We didn't speak. We just stared at the trail entrance, waiting, terrified of what we might see. But nothing came out. The woods were still. The crickets slowly returned, like someone had flipped a switch back on. The world sounded normal again. After a few minutes, we forced ourselves to grab the flashlight, jog back to my house, and lock the door. We didn't talk about it much afterwards. Jason would brush it off whenever I brought it up, saying maybe it was an animal, maybe just some drunk messing with us. But I know what I heard. I've walked that trail dozens of times in daylight. I've seen bears, coyotes, people out hunting or fishing. I know what those sound like. This wasn't that. The sound that night, those footsteps, that scream, were nothing I've ever experienced before or since. I still hike, but not after dark, and not on that trail. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I can still hear that distorted voice in my head, faint, hollow, calling out through the trees. And I know, deep down, that if I had answered, I might not be here to tell the story.
I'm Tara Collins. I manage the night shift at a Quick Mart in a small town in Oregon. This story still makes my hands shake whenever I think about it. The graveyard shift isn't peaceful. Not really. It hums under your skin. Every sound feels too close, like someone breathing just behind you, even when no one's there. That night, the air outside was freezing. Frosted fog covered the windows, making the inside feel like a separate world. I was stacking chips near the back when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. Someone was outside. A man, helmet on, sitting on a small electric scooter, just standing there, staring directly at me. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone, maybe a friend, maybe just lost. But his eyes, they weren't looking at the store. They were looking at me, straight through me. I waved, nothing. No blink, no movement. Just that still, frozen stare. I returned to stalking, trying to act normal, but I could feel him. That sense of being watched it crawls under your skin. When I looked again, he had moved closer to the glass, head tilted slightly like he was observing, analyzing, studying me. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, maybe some kid playing a prank, but my stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed at me that this wasn't normal. He stayed for a long minute, not moving, just tilting his head, silently, like he was reading me, memorizing my face. Then he turned around and rode away slowly, the faint electric buzz of the scooter fading into the night. I thought it was over, but moments later, 3 slow knocks came from the back door. Solid, even, deliberate. The kind of knock that tells you someone knows exactly where you are. I called the night security guard. 20 minutes felt like an hour. I stood by the counter, gripping the baseball bat we kept under the register, watching the glass, waiting for the next sound. The lights outside flickered. Something brushed against the window. Faint squeak, like gloved fingers sliding down the surface. Then, silence. Absolute silence. I held my breath, waiting, heart pounding, expecting him to reappear. But nothing. When security arrived, we walked the lot together. No man, no scooter. Only the tire marks, thin and fresh, circling the building. Weeks later, I would catch my reflection in the window and freeze, half expecting that helmeted head to tilt at me again, watching. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I feel someone outside, just beyond the glass, memorizing me, waiting.
I'm Caleb Dunn, 41. I used to work as a security guard before switching to nights at a gas station in rural Missouri. I thought it would be an easy job, quiet, predictable, but quiet can be deceptive. It can lull you into a false sense of safety until it isn't safe at all. It was around 1 a.m. I was behind the counter, checking inventory and stacking drinks, when the door creaked open. At first, I didn't see him. I only smelled it. Metallic, sharp, blood. That unmistakable, sickening tang that makes your stomach twist. I looked up. A man walked in, hoodie pulled over his head, one hand pressed tightly against his stomach. Dark, wet stains soaked his sleeve, dripping slowly onto the floor tiles with a soft, sticky sound. He moved quickly, but not in panic. His steps were deliberate, precise, like someone who knew exactly where they were and what they were doing. He grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of cigarettes and slammed them onto the counter. The sound echoed through the empty store, louder than it should have. I froze. Every part of me wanted to run, but my body refused. My brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough. I asked if he needed help. His eyes, glassy, empty, detached. Not like someone in pain, like someone disconnected from reality, or worse, from humanity. "Don't worry," he said, almost smiling. "It's not my blood." Then he laughed. Soft, short, a sound meant to reassure, but it didn't. It echoed in my ears and my mind long after he left. I rang up his items, bills smeared with blood. Every time he handed me the money, I felt it. Cold, sticky, wrong. I tried to avoid looking at him directly, but I couldn't.
My eyes kept catching something in his other hand. A rag? Something wrapped in fabric. Dark, dripping, hidden, but unmistakably heavy. He turned and left, headlights still off, engine idling. I watched him drive into the darkness. The parking lot was empty, but the air still felt thick, oppressive, like the smell of iron was following me. I immediately called the police. 40 minutes later, they arrived. They said maybe he hit an animal. Maybe. But the smell, that iron-heavy stench, it wasn't from any animal I've ever known. And the way he moved, deliberate, calm, it didn't match an accident. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The wet stains on his sleeve, the laugh, those glassy, empty eyes. I replayed the scene in my mind over and over, each time noticing something I hadn't before. The way his hand lingered near the counter like he was marking me, remembering me. 2 nights later, the news reported a missing person found near the highway. Car model matched, same direction, same night. They never caught him. After that, everything changed. The quiet nights that used to feel safe now felt dangerous. Every creak in the store made my heart race. Every shadow seemed alive. Every stranger I saw felt like they might be him, waiting, watching, deciding. Even weeks later, I couldn't shake it. Every time I handle cash, I imagine the blood on the bills. Every reflection in the glass, I half expect to see his eyes staring back at me. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that soft, short laugh. Don't worry, it's not my blood. I know now, that night changed me. The world feels smaller at night. The quiet feels heavier. And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel him outside the store, hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting for the next moment I'm alone. I don't know if he's still out there. I don't know if I'll see him again. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget that smell, that laugh, those eyes.
My name's Evan Morales. I'm 27. I work the night shift at a gas station just outside Fresno, California. Most nights are quiet, very quiet. Sometimes it's just me, the hum of the fridges, and the occasional trucker stopping by. When it's that quiet, you start noticing things that don't really belong. It had rained earlier that evening. The asphalt was slick, reflecting the flickering neon lights like tiny pools of liquid fire. The smell of wet pavement mixed with gasoline hung heavy in the air. I was behind the counter, stocking energy drinks, when I noticed my reflection in the window. For a split second, it wasn't me. There was someone else, just standing there, a shadow moving behind my own. I shook my head. Must have been my imagination. These late nights can play tricks on your mind. But even as I told myself that, my chest was tight. That uneasy feeling, the one you get when your body knows something your brain doesn't, it was growing. Then I saw it. Headlights. A black sedan pulling up outside. No lights. Engine idling. The car stopped right in front of the door, like it was waiting, watching. I can't explain it, but I just knew something was wrong. He walked in, mid-30s maybe,
jeans, plain jacket. Nothing remarkable. Except his eyes. They didn't seem to focus on anything real. Not the shelves, not the counter. Just moving, flickering, like he was seeing something I couldn't. He walked straight to the counter. $20, pump 3, he said. Calm, flat, empty. I handed him the change. When our hands touched, ice cold. Not outside cold, deep, dead cold. Like he had no life in him at all. He stared too long. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. Not blinking, not smiling, just observing. I kept stocking the shelves, pretending to be busy, but my eyes kept drifting to him. Every breath, every movement, measured, deliberate, like he was studying me. Then he did something strange. He looked at the ceiling, then the lights, then back at me, and tilted his head. A slow, almost curious tilt, like he was assessing, figuring something out. The store felt smaller somehow. The fridges humming louder, the neon flickering more, my heart pounding like it would explode. I kept thinking of every horror story I'd ever heard, and suddenly, I was living one. He turned and walked out, slow steps, engine still running, headlights off. I ran to the window. He didn't get in the car. He just sat there, silent, watching me through the glass. The sign above the station flickered, neon pink light reflecting on his windshield, and I swear I saw him smile, a slow, cold, unnatural smile. I couldn't look away. My stomach turned, my hand shook. Minutes passed. I tried convincing myself I was imagining it, a trick of the rain, a reflection, anything. But the car, gone. No sound, no taillights, nothing. Just empty, wet asphalt and that feeling that something terrible had just been there. The next morning, my coworker dropped a newspaper on the counter. Recognize him? Front page. Same jacket, same eyes. Arrested for killing a woman in her car. I stared at the photo, frozen. Those eyes, colder than I remembered, calculating. I thought of his touch, the ice cold of his hand, the way he had measured me, like I was prey. I replay it in my mind constantly. That smile, that tilt of his head, the way he sat in that car, waiting, watching. Now, whenever a car idles outside too long, I feel it. My throat tightens. Sometimes late at night, I see him in the reflection of the glass, just for a second, just enough to know he's still out there. And I wonder, does he remember me too?
I'm Jules Carter, 29, college student. I work nights at a gas station in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This happened during one of my shifts back in March. I'd been working nights long enough to know exhaustion can play tricks on your eyes. The shadows move, the lights flicker, and you start seeing things that aren't there. But sometimes, they are. It was a little after 1 a.m. when I saw him. Or it. A figure standing outside the doors. Tall. Still. Wearing a plain white mask. Smooth. Expressionless. With black holes for eyes. At first I thought maybe it was a prank, some random person messing with night workers. But then I realized it was March, too early for Halloween. And the figure didn't move at all. Not a twitch. Not a step. Nothing.
I grabbed my phone, thinking about calling the police. I tried dialing, but my hands wouldn't work properly. It was like fear had taken control of my body. Every second felt stretched, every heartbeat loud enough to hear in my ears. The figure lifted one hand slowly, pressing it flat against the glass. The skin of the glove squeaked, leaving a faint mark on the window, a long, deliberate streak. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The mask tilted its head slightly, and I felt my stomach drop. That tiny movement, so deliberate, it made everything in me scream that something was wrong. I moved around the counter, trying to see more clearly. Nothing changed. The figure remained frozen, watching, patient. The wind outside whispered across the parking lot. The streetlight flickered and cast bending shadows across the asphalt, shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, like the figure's presence was reaching inside. I finally managed to call the police, hands trembling. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone. The lot was empty. No car, no person, nothing. But the marks remained on the glass, long streaks, greasy, like someone had slowly traced their hands across every inch of the window before disappearing. 2 weeks later, the same window was smashed during another night shift. Security cameras captured nothing but static, and in the very last frame before the feed cut, I swear I saw a faint white shape, a mask, reflected in the glass, staring back at the store. After that, every night felt different. Shadows seemed heavier. Every sound, no matter how small, made me jump. I caught myself checking the glass repeatedly, expecting that mask to be there, tilting its head, silently watching. Even now, years later, when I drive past that gas station, I feel a chill. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I see those black holes staring back at me, waiting.
I'm Marcus Hale, 35. I run the night shift at a small gas station off the I-90 in South Dakota. The bathrooms in our station are old, the kind with metal doors that shriek when you open them. You can hear that sound from anywhere in the building. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard it, a slow creak, the faint click of a lock turning. I hadn't seen anyone come in for almost an hour. The store was empty, except for the hum of the fridges and the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights. I called out, "Restrooms closed for cleaning." No answer. Silence. Just the echo of my own voice bouncing back. I froze. Something about that silence, it didn't feel empty, it felt heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the door. The lights in the bathroom were off. The air was thick, heavy with that mix of disinfectant and damp tile, the kind that clings to your skin. I pushed the door open slowly and felt a rush of cold air hit me, like someone had just moved past me. My heart jumped into my throat. I shined the flashlight under the stalls. Nothing. Empty. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Uneven. Hesitant. Like someone was trying not to make a sound. It came from the far stall. My stomach dropped. My blood ran cold. I crouched down, shining the light more carefully. And there they were. Bare, dirty feet, facing forward, still, silent. My mind went blank. I couldn't think. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt frozen. I backed away slowly, trying not to alert them, my flashlight shaking.
Every instinct screamed at me to run. Every noise, the creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, sounded louder than it should. I ran to the back office, locked the door, and called the police. My hands shook violently as I dialed. 15 minutes later, they arrived. They searched the whole building, including the bathroom. Nothing. Empty. Not a trace. When I went back to inspect, I noticed the tiny window above the sink, wide open, supposed to be sealed shut. Small smudges, maybe blood, maybe mud, I couldn't tell, but it was clear someone had come through that window. Then there was the security camera pointing down the hall. It glitched, exactly the moment I heard the door open. Nothing appeared on the footage, just static. But in the last frame before the feed cut, I swear I saw a shadow, a figure, crouched, watching. Since that night, every little sound unsettles me. A floorboard creaking, a faucet dripping, even the hum of the fridge can make me jump. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the bathroom from across the store, imagining someone standing there, hidden in the shadows, breathing slowly, watching me, waiting. Even when I'm home, years later, I still hear the faint creak of a door. My mind immediately goes back to that night. I replay the scene over and over. The cold air, the feet under the stall, the window, the glitch in the camera. And I wonder, was it a person or something else? Something that can move through windows, shadows, and silence, unnoticed, patient, waiting for the next time I'm alone. I haven't worked nights there since. I couldn't. But the memory, that sense of being hunted, that soft, uneven breathing, it follows me everywhere. And sometimes, I swear I still feel it just behind me.
I don't really talk about things like this, but I've been thinking about what happened for years, and lately I've been having trouble sleeping again. I guess I just need to put it out somewhere. People won't immediately tell me I imagined it. This was in winter 2016, when I was 26. I was doing freelance photography then, mostly nature and abandoned places. My girlfriend had just moved out, and I wanted a quiet break to reset my head and work on a portfolio project I've been planning for ages, winter landscapes, the kind that looked like they were taken on another planet. A friend of a friend told me about these cheap off-season cabins near a lake in northern Montana, barely maintained, but apparently beautiful. I called the park office, and they said they had one available. No plumbing, generator for power, and the ranger checked in every few days. It sounded perfect. I packed my camera gear, a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero nights, and a week's worth of canned food. The drive up took longer than I thought. The last hour was all gravel road, nothing but pine trees and drifts of snow piled against the guardrails. My phone lost service around mile marker 32, which turned out to be the last sign I saw for days. The cabin was small, one room, wood stove in the corner, a narrow bed, and a single gas lamp on a hook. There was a generator out back that ran for a few hours on one tank. The first night I sat near the stove, listening to the metal pop from the heat, reading by lamplight. It felt peaceful. Days fell into a rhythm. I'd wake up around sunrise, make coffee with melted snow, hike out onto the frozen lake to take photos of the trees mirrored on the ice. The silence there was unreal. It's not like city silence. It's thick, like the snow eats sound before it travels. At night, I'd transfer photos onto my laptop and write notes by flashlight. My breath hung in the air constantly, even indoors. The smell of pine smoke clung to my clothes, and everything creaked. The floorboards, the window frames, even the stovepipe when the wind hit it right. The first weird thing happened on my third night. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside. 3 slow knocks. I thought maybe a tree branch had blown loose and was tapping the siding. It happened again an hour later, the same rhythm. When I stepped onto the porch with my flashlight, the beam caught nothing but swirling snow. The next morning I found footprints, faint like partial impressions in the powder, circling the cabin once, not leading away, not coming from anywhere, just a rough ring around the perimeter. I took a photo, half joking that maybe a coyote had walked laps in the night, but the prints looked human, barely defined, but longer than my boots. I rationalized it easily. Maybe an old print exposed by drifting snow, or maybe my own from unloading gear. Still, that night I pushed the table against the door just in case. On the 4th day, the weather turned. Thick gray sky, steady snowfall. I spent the morning indoors editing. That's when I noticed my tripod, the one I'd left folded by the door, was extended, one leg slightly adjusted. I don't even know why I noticed, just that it was off from how I left it. I told myself I must have bumped it. But when you're alone that far from people, every small detail feels amplified. The generator started to sputter that evening, so I turned it off early. I had this cheap shortwave radio for weather updates, one of those crank kinds that also runs on batteries. Sometimes I'd pick up static and faint stations from Canada. That night I was scrolling through the channels when I heard something through the static, a soft whisper that cut in mid-sentence. It said my first name. Just once, clear enough to recognize. Then it went back to white noise. I froze. My first thought was that someone nearby had a transceiver and was messing around, maybe a ranger or another camper. But when I checked the frequency display, it was blank, not even registering a signal. I sat there for a long time with the radio in my lap, listening to the hiss, until I couldn't tell if I was still hearing it or if it had become part of the silence outside. The snow started again that night, heavy, relentless. By 10 p.m., the wind was loud enough that I couldn't tell if something was knocking or just the branches scraping the roof. The temperature dropped fast. The windows frosted over from the inside. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, crunching snow, stopping, then starting again. The cabin wasn't big, so I could hear each board creak under weight. I grabbed my flashlight and went still. The steps stopped right outside the door. I didn't breathe for a few seconds, just listened. Then, the faint sound of breathing. Close. Not through the door, through the window beside it. I turned the light toward the glass, but all I saw was frost. The outside was coated white, so thick you couldn't see through. But in the center of the frost, a shape began to appear, a dark blur pressed against it from the other side, as if someone leaned their forehead there. Then came a circle of condensation, spreading outward like breath. For maybe 10 seconds, I stared, waiting for it to move. I wanted to tell myself it was some thermal trick, heat escaping, whatever, but the circle pulsed, like with breathing. When I stepped closer, it stopped. I didn't open the door. I backed away, killed the lamp, and sat on the bed with my jacket still on. The footsteps didn't come back, but I heard faint shifting now and then, wood creaking where weight shouldn't be. At some point, I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, weak daylight was bleeding through the window. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything until I saw the glass. There were handprints on the outside. Not frost melted by heat, actual frozen outlines, as if something warm had pressed there long enough for moisture to refreeze in shape.
5 perfect fingers, splayed wide. I took a photo before I left, though I've never shown it to anyone. I packed in less than 20 minutes. I left half my gear, including the generator and food, and started driving back toward the highway. The first 30 miles, I didn't see a single car. When I finally reached service, I called the park office and told them I'd left early because of weather. The woman on the line said she'd let the ranger know. I didn't mention the handprints. A month later, I got a message from the same ranger who checked me in. He said he'd stopped by the cabin to make sure everything was fine and found it locked from the inside, lights off, generator still fueled. He thought maybe I had left through the window, except the snow around the place was completely smooth, no footprints at all. He asked if I'd maybe visited again to grab my stuff. I said no. I don't remember what else he said after that. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep unless every window in my apartment was covered. I kept catching my reflection in the glass and expecting to see something behind it, fogging up the surface from the outside. I still do winter shoots sometimes, but never alone, and never where there's frost thick enough to hold a breath. Every now and then, I'll be out somewhere cold, early morning, before sunrise, and I'll hear that same dull knocking, spaced just like it was that night. I always tell myself it's branches or maybe ice shifting. That's what makes sense. But deep down, I can still see that faint circle forming on the frozen glass right at the height of my face, like something remembering where I'd been standing. That's it. I don't know what I saw or if I saw anything at all, but it's been 9 years, and even now, when the temperature drops below freezing, I swear the air feels heavier, like it's waiting for me to breathe first.
I'm not the kind of person who believes in paranormal stuff. I still don't, technically. But there's one night I can't explain, no matter how many times I try to rationalize it. It happened in December 2009, when I was 19, driving home from college for Christmas. My university was in upstate New York, and my family lived in western Pennsylvania. Normally, it was a 6-hour drive, boring but easy. That year, a snowstorm hit the interstate hard, so my GPS rerouted me through back roads. That's how I ended up on a road called Hollow Ridge Pass. I hadn't heard of it before that night, and I've never found it again since. I'd left campus later than planned, around 9 p.m., I was tired from finals and running mostly on gas station coffee. The storm had started earlier than forecast, thick, swirling snow that the headlights couldn't cut through. It felt like driving inside static. My car was a beat-up 2001 Civic with weak heat and windshield wipers that squeaked every pass. The radio was tuned low to keep me awake, but all I got was fuzz between stations. The air smelled like wet fabric and stale sugar from a spilled energy drink. I remember thinking how weirdly empty the world felt. No cars behind me, none ahead, just white road, white trees, white sky. The GPS told me to turn onto a road I didn't recognize. The sign was half buried in snow, but I could make out the letters, Hollow Ridge RD. It didn't look maintained. Narrow, tree-lined, no streetlights. But the map said it would reconnect with the highway after 20 miles. So I took it. Almost immediately, the snow seemed heavier, like the air was thicker there. The trees leaned closer, branches scraping the roof whenever I passed under them. My headlights only reached about 10 feet before everything turned into a swirling white blur. After maybe 15 minutes, I noticed something odd. A mailbox on the right side of the road, bent and half broken. The red flag was still up even though it was dark. I barely thought about it at the time. Then, 5 minutes later, I saw the same mailbox again. Same dent, same number, same angle. I thought I'd somehow loop back without realizing. Maybe I had made a turn or drifted onto a side road. I slowed down to check the GPS, but the screen showed no road at all, just a gray background, like the map had failed to load. The arrow representing my car was frozen in place. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe the storm was blocking the signal. I kept driving, slower now. My hands were starting to ache from gripping the steering wheel. The radio cut in and out, and every few seconds I caught bits of voices, too faint to make out words, like overlapping whispers. I assumed I was picking up 2 a.m. stations colliding in the static. But one phrase came through clear enough that I remember it exactly. Keep left. Don't come through twice. The voice was calm, male, not robotic. I actually laughed. It sounded like something from a numbers station. I said out loud, "Yeah, sure, whatever," and turned the volume down. 10 minutes later, there was the mailbox again. I started to feel that creeping cold in my chest, not from the air, but from the realization that something wasn't adding up. I looked at the odometer. I'd driven another 6 miles. I couldn't possibly be in the same place. I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow to U-turn without risking a ditch. So I just kept crawling forward, waiting for any kind of landmark. The snow reflected my headlights so completely it felt like daylight in a tunnel, endless and flat. Then I saw someone. A figure standing on the shoulder about 30 feet ahead. They weren't moving, just standing with their arms at their sides. They looked small, maybe 5.5 feet, wearing what looked like a light jacket, not nearly enough for that cold. I slowed down, rolled the window down an inch, and shouted something like, "Hey, you okay? You need a ride?" No reaction, but I could swear that even though their head didn't move, I heard words. Inside my head, not through my ears. A quiet, neutral voice saying, "You already came through." And then silence. The person turned slightly toward the road, and I swear their face looked blurred, like a photograph that never finished developing. My brain kept trying to fill it in, but couldn't. I panicked and pressed the gas, inching past. As I did, the figure turned fully toward me. My headlights washed over them, or tried to. The snowflakes falling between us bent around their outline, like light avoiding a heat source. The air shimmered for a moment, and then the figure was gone. Not stepped away. Gone. My heart was pounding so hard I had to pull over. I sat there breathing into my hands until I realized how cold it had gotten in the car, colder than outside. My windows had fogged from the inside. I turned the key to start the engine again, and the radio burst into life. A sudden blast of static so loud I flinched. Buried under it, I heard that same phrase again. Keep left. Don't come through twice. I turned the wheel slightly left, even though there was no intersection, just instinct. A few seconds later, I saw faint headlights ahead. Moving, another car, finally. When I blinked, the lights were gone. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, but must have been 10 minutes, the trees thinned and I hit a plowed intersection with a sign pointing towards Route 58. I stopped there, heart still hammering, and and looked behind me. The road I'd come from wasn't on any map. The GPS suddenly refreshed, showing only 2 intersecting lines. No hollow ridge. When I reached the next town, I pulled into a diner parking lot to calm down. My hands were shaking too much to text. The guy in a snowplow parked nearby got out and asked if I was lost. I said I'd just come from Hollow Ridge. He gave me this blank look, then said, "You mean Hollow Ridge Pass? That road's been closed since '97, washed out halfway through. You couldn't have driven it." I didn't argue. I just sat there until the coffee cooled in front of me. For a long time, I thought it was fatigue. Maybe I had hallucinated from lack of sleep or mild hypothermia. But even now, I can still hear that voice sometimes when I'm driving in heavy snow. It's faint under the engine noise, like AM static whispering through the vents. A few years later, I tried to look up that road again. I found an old county map online. It listed a Hollow Ridge Pass, but it ended at a small river with a note, "Bridge collapsed, 1997, fatal accident." No names, no details. I don't know what I saw, but I'll tell you one more thing that still freaks me out. Every winter since then, whenever snow starts falling hard, my car's GPS randomly freezes for a few seconds. And sometimes when it comes back, the map shows a gray background. No road, just that same empty space. Once, out of curiosity, I zoomed in, and right where my location arrow sat, in faint gray letters barely visible against the map, it said, Hollow Ridge RD.
It was winter 2022, and I was 33. At the time, I worked for the Public Works Department of a small town in Maine, maintenance on water systems, dams, and reservoirs. Basically, check gauges, monitor flow, make sure pipes don't freeze and nothing collapses. Most of it was boring, until it wasn't. That winter was brutal. Weeks of sub-zero nights, the kind that turned breath into needles. I was assigned to the North Edge Reservoir, an old man-made lake surrounded by pine forest, about a mile from the nearest house. There was a small control shed near the dam, concrete, metal door, single electric heater that barely worked. My routine was simple. Get there by 6:30 a.m., check the pressure gauges and intake screens, clear snow from the turbine grates, log everything by hand because the computer system froze half the time. I'd usually bring a thermos of coffee and a portable radio just for company. That place had its own kind of silence. Not the kind peaceful. It was the hum and rattle kind, where machinery never really stops, but the sound doesn't feel alive. Inside the control shed, everything smelled metallic, cold oil, rust, damp concrete. The air always carried a faint vibration from the turbines below, like a heartbeat you could only feel through your boots. Outside, the reservoir stretched flat and white, frozen solid, except for a dark patch near the middle, where the outflow currents kept it thin. Some mornings I'd hear cracking noises, long, slow groans as the ice shifted. I used to tell new guys that ice can sound alive if you listen too long. Turns out I was more right than I wanted to be. The weird stuff started around January 10th. We'd had a warm day, followed by a hard freeze, which always messes with the pressure readings. I was logging numbers when I noticed that one of the gauges, the west line, kept flickering between normal pressure and zero. No leak alarms, no flow drop, just flickering. I went outside to check the vent pipes. The cold hit like a slap. Everything was dead quiet, except for the wind moving over the ice. Then I heard tapping. Soft, steady, rhythmic, like someone knocking on metal. At first I thought it was expansion noise from the frozen pipes, but it was coming from the direction of the reservoir itself, not the dam. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Almost like Morse code, but too slow. I wrote it off as echo from cracking ice. Still, I marked the log. Unusual noise, likely stress shift. A few mornings later, I noticed footprints near the reservoir edge, boot prints leading toward the thin ice zone. We were supposed to be the only ones with access. The gate lock was intact. The tracks ended right at the waterline, where the ice turned dark. No return prints. It was probably from a fisherman, I told myself. Someone sneaked in, realized it was unsafe, and turned back along their own tracks. Except they didn't. There were none leading back. I radioed it in. My supervisor just said, "Mark it and move on. Ice plays tricks on depth perception." So, I did. But that night, I dreamed of those prints. Fresh, clean, leading nowhere. The real event happened on January 17th, just before midnight. I was on call that week, which meant I had to respond to alerts even off hours. A sensor flag came in for pressure drop, so I drove up alone. Temperature was minus 22 degrees Celsius. Sky so clear it looked fake. The moonlight made the reservoir glow pale blue. When I got to the control shed, the gauges all read normal. No leaks, no drops, but the tapping had started again. It was louder now, echoing through the pipes, distinct, deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. I followed the sound outside. Standing near the edge, I felt the vibration under my boots. Then I noticed movement beneath the ice, a dark shape drifting slowly. At first I thought it was a log trapped under the surface, but logs don't change direction like that. I knelt and aimed my flashlight down. The beam hit something pale under the ice. A face. At least, that's what it looked like. Human-shaped, eyes open, mouth wide as if mid-scream. Frozen, maybe a foot below the surface. But the part that froze me wasn't the face. It was the eyes. They moved. Just a fraction. Following the light. I jumped back, nearly slipping. For a second, everything went still. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A deep, hollow crack, like a gunshot underwater. The ice flexed, groaning. I ran for the shed, slammed the door, and killed the floodlights. Inside, the heater hummed weakly. The tapping had stopped. I sat there until sunrise, staring at the gauges. All readings were normal, except the west line, which now read 0.00. Completely flat. No fluctuation, no pressure pulse, nothing. Like something had closed it off. When my relief shift showed up, I didn't say much, just that the west line sensor was down. The next day, a team came out to check the pipe. They drilled core samples near where I'd seen the face. Nothing unusual, just ice, sediment, water.
The guy running the sonar said the readings showed a void under that section, like a pocket. He joked that maybe it was the ghost of bad engineering. They patched it, reset the gauge, and left. Nobody found anything resembling a body. That night, I went home and opened the logbook. My entry from the night before, pressure 0, had been crossed out in red pen, initialed by a supervisor I'd never heard of. I didn't question it. By February, I'd transferred to street maintenance. Couldn't stand the sound of running water anymore. Every time a pipe clanged or air hissed through a valve, I'd freeze up. The new guy who took over my old route quit after 2 weeks. When I asked around, nobody knew why. He just stopped showing up. One of the older crew mentioned that back in the 80s, before the reservoir was expanded, there'd been a small settlement in that valley. Houses flooded out when they built the dam. People used to say that during certain winters, you could hear knocking from under the ice, like the old houses settling. I laughed it off, but not really. It's been 3 years now. I live inland, nowhere near lakes or rivers. But sometimes, when it's cold enough for frost to crawl up the windows, I hear that tapping again. Faint, like it's coming from inside the walls. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I tell myself it's pipes contracting, or maybe just memory. But every time I hear it, I can almost see that pale face beneath the ice, eyes following the light, mouth open like it's still trying to finish a sound. I never told anyone at work what I saw. Didn't want to end up in a report or psyche eval. Still, whenever I pass frozen water, I can't help glancing down, not to see what's there, but to make sure nothing's looking up.